Exactly.
you're not putting tripwires in front of yourself. Like that's my home defense system. Is I have a tripwire on my back door, and if I forget about it that day or I just take a wrong step, then whoops.
Whoops. Crossbow bolt to the chest.
Yeah.
Should have remembered. Welcome to Monsters and Multiclass, your Dungeons and Dragons fix. I'm Elioti,
Jared Bornagle.
And I'm Will Melden.
and this is our Traps episode, our guide to traps, as we're kind of saying it. We're going to take a look at how traps work in Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition specifically. Like, there's a whole Xanathar's simple versus complex traps. Our thoughts on like how to make good traps in your games, memorable ones we had, things like that. So, traps are big parts of dungeons, and I think a lot of DMs struggle to put them in and how to best utilize them. So, we're giving our thoughts.
Yeah, and in general, I mean the traps chapter in Xanathar's is very helpful. Obviously, we're going to be adding our own additional thoughts and experiences on top of that. But I'd say in terms of things being well written, I mean, a lot of times I will be the first to give crap to the DMG or to just about any official book. But there's a lot of care putting into it, and say talking about it in terms of either simple traps or complex traps. Simple traps would be the kind of classic, you are walking down a hallway, you step on a pressure plate, and a guillotine comes and slices past you. Boom, that's the trap. It's simple, it's done, and it moves on. Whereas a
Yep.
complex trap, we're looking at stuff that's a little more, well, complicated. It might be like an entire hallway filled with traps, or something that is designed to usually be played out over the course of multiple rounds and have different ways to interact with it to either get through it or disarm the trap.
Yeah, so it's interesting how to try and balance the two of these and fit them into like a dungeon crawl setting because they're both essentially encounters. And traps that are anything that's really going to sap resources, hurt characters, things like that are essentially encounters. But these simple traps really are that there is a trigger, there is an effect, and it's done. They could obviously be spotted, they could be disarmed by just like a one roll or two. So they're kind of like light encounters. They often will just hurt one person, and usually not a whole lot. Where the complex traps are like more like whenever I've used them, and I replaced combat with them.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I would want like three kind of complex combat encounters of different cool enemies and settings and stuff like that, and yanked one of those out and put a complex trap in for it because they take the same amount of time as combat. They're in initiative order, and they drain significantly more resources than like the one and done simple traps.
Right, and very often you'll want a battle map, some way of
Yes.
letting people know where things are, what the objects are in a room that they may want to interact with. But yeah, I mean, when looking at say the simple traps, they are broken up into three different things: the trigger, so the thing that is going to initially set it off; an effect, so what happens once the trap has been triggered; and then countermeasures as well, which is kind of a little more abstract of one, because the countermeasures, while giving a way to either perceive the trap or to disable it or disarm it, whatever, it's something that I think when we're talking about good traps, it's always important to keep that as an open ended thing. Just because the book reads, or because you personally thought of a way to disarm it, that doesn't mean that should be the only way to disarm it. It's a time to let people get creative with things. Maybe one person the rogue wants to try and use thieves' tools on a trap to get this mechanism, trigger this, and then disarm it. Whereas the barbarian's like, hey, can I smash it? Yeah, maybe. Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, and I love that, and definitely 100% agree. Traps are the time to let like creative uses of features and spells come into effect, especially the simple ones. Where yeah, I mean, so they're blowing a second level spell slot to avoid it entirely, and what they said kind of like felt a little creative, made sense, even though if it's not exactly what the spell does. I would allow it. It's wasting, not wasting, using up a resource, creative thinking. A lot of times I'm big on the spells do what they say, and like, no,
Right.
you can't drown someone with create water or use shape water to pick a lock or something like that. But get around a trap, sure, as long as it's not just a cantrip.
Right. That's always our thing. I know that comes up a lot at our table as well. Like I'll put something in the way. And we had a new player recently and they were like, "Oh, can I, cast whatever, like a basic fire cantrip basically on something to cause damage to this ice or whatever." And I'm like, it's not strong enough. It's like, well, okay. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm this high of a level caster. It should do this much damage, and it's like, no, it's a cantrip. I mean, we can sit here going back and forth, but at the end of the day, this is D&D, and it's a resource management game. And if
Hmm.
resources aren't being burnt, it's probably not strong enough.
Right. Yeah, but just simply bypassed by a cantrip. And
Literally every
unless
trap designed was made immune to Mage Hand. A lot of people don't know that. You probably didn't know that
I,
either, DMG. But it's
Right.
true. Mage Hand does not
I
work on traps anymore. It's been 50 years.
I was going to say that it if there is a roll to notice the trap, if that's the countermeasure, a perception check, if like someone's checking for traps and there's a DC 15 perception check or whatever it is, and if they get below it, they just don't see it and blunder right into it. But if they happen to see it, then okay, yeah, maybe let them like that. That's the discerning thing.
Sure.
They happen to pass it. Sure, it won't burn a resource, but if yeah, they're let them mage hand the trigger from 30 feet away or whatever it is.
Yeah, and it depends on the trap as well, right? Because I
Yeah.
mean, even in Xanathars here, it's broken into not only simple but threat levels. Is it a dangerous one? So it's going to do more damage, cause more issues, whatever. I mean, that's something where if your party is in a dungeon and they come across like a pitfall trap and they see it, I mean, you can't sit there and be like, oh no, you need to cast a spell in order to get around this pit trap. It's like, okay, but can we just walk around it? Yeah, you can just walk around it. It's
Yeah.
fine. It obviously you need to design it so that it makes sense if they notice it beforehand that it either needs to be interacted with or cannot. And honestly, that can be difficult at times because sometimes you do want to put these traps in place and it's a pressure plate on the floor and the party goes, "Oh, can I just walk around it or can we jump over it?" And it can feel almost unsatisfying because you wanted either the trap to be dealt with in a more meaningful way, but jumping over the pressure plate isn't particularly exciting. Everybody remembers the rules for long jumping and goes, "Oh yeah, I can jump like 20 feet. This isn't a big deal." And it's it loses some flair.
Yeah, it just all comes down to how many traps you're doing, what you're kind of looking for. It's the role to play. Because you could also do it where like it's a pit trap and they either don't find it and blunder right into it and they fall and they get hurt, or they find it and realize the next 30 feet of flooring is rigged to go the entire hallway.
Right.
And then there's the debate of okay, it's a challenge, a creative challenge to figure out how we're going to get the entire party over this. And maybe the wizard has fly, and it's like, all right, they could cast fly and then carry someone as a third level spell. And then they start doing the very, very gamey math, which sometimes I hate and sometimes it's fun of okay, is it maybe just worth taking the damage and walking through the pit trap to not spend a third level spell in this dungeon that we don't know how far it's going? Or should we cast fly?
I mean, it's a very real conversation, right? Because
Yeah.
depending on your party makeup, maybe health is easier to get back than spell slots and such. And to me, I mean, there's yes, it's gamey, but when we are talking about a dungeon crawl, which is where you mainly see traps, that's D&D at its gamiest. Things are going to turn into that resource management, that how do we get through this with the things that we can spare and the things that we can't spare. So yeah, it's as long as your group likes those types of conversations, I'd say we definitely do. But otherwise, sure, somebody says, no, we're going to role play this out entirely. And the answer is we're going to fly because we just don't want to go into spikes. Yeah, that's fine too.
Right.
But it's still, I like the fact that there's different ways to approach it. And the idea of a trap that only has one way to solve it is always going to be a negative. Almost
Yeah.
always. Sometimes you're just, no, I'm going to stand by that. It's always a negative. I stopped putting in traps that only had one way to deal with them. It's just not interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe good against like a level 1 through 4 party or something who are new to D&D. That's great. They are more learning the game though, and that is a fine enough challenge, but once you're past that point, you don't need to put in the basic stuff like a net falling from the ceiling and it picks up the party and then somebody realizes, oh, I've got a sword, I can just cut my way out. It's like, was that really a fun trap to put in if there was no follow up or anything?
That depends on how I would say the area is designed. And they continue to talk on purpose. And Xanathars actually lays this out in simple trap purposes, which I really like how they do this.
Hmm.
Where the purpose to so in that one delay, it's
Right.
like yeah, a net trap's not going to permanently hold anyone, but it could delay them or restrain them for a period of time. And then if the dungeon has regular guard patrols, it's could if they're trying to sneak through and avoid some combat, that could really mess them up. Where
Right.
all of a sudden, like doing all that is going to get them caught, and then it's something they have to deal with, even though the net itself is not really a problem.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's where I'm saying the follow up is important, right? You have to
yeah,
be kind of, you have to put yourself in the mind of the dungeon designer. These can't just be things that are made to purely exhaust health or to burn spell slots. You can to some extent, but trying to put yourself in that mindset of like, why am I putting this here? Oh, because as you said, this is going to delay them, and if I delay them, there's a higher chance that somebody spots them, alerts people, so on and so forth.
right, yeah. And then there's also the alarm purpose where
Mm,
it doesn't hurt them, it doesn't restrain them, it's just simply alerts who's ever in the area that hey,
right.
there's someone here.
I actually remember doing that at the very start of our last campaign. You all were going into a goblin cave, and very first thing when you walked in, there was um, some like skulls or something up ahead, and it was to distract you from a tripwire that basically set an alarm down the hallway, letting them know that people were coming into the cave. And that was entirely the purpose. It wasn't trying to, it basically set a really obvious trap up in front so that the more subtle one was not noticed.
Yeah, some tricky goblins.
I mean, goblins are, that's how goblins should be
Yeah.
played.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
They're
And then
bastards.
yeah. And then this just rounded out the last purpose. It says a slay, which is the typical damage traps, trying to kill intruders, just right where it is. And in terms of using those, I would think it needs to be a good mix of mechanically what's going to be fun for the party and what's makes sense from like a world building perspective. Like if this is like a very active area, like you can kind of build a quote unquote dungeon, but it's this is like a keep or a hideout for something or whatever, and it's just an active area with people who are supposed to be there coming and going a lot. You're probably not going to find sleigh traps everywhere. That sounds like an ocean nightmare. That's just like
You're right. I agree with that, but I do think it's fun to kind of design the traps like that, where if you know the correct way to deal with them,
yeah,
then it's not a problem. And
yeah.
that
So
that can
it's
always be interesting too.
Yeah, that's like a wizard tower because like the wizard's like super intelligent and they built all this and crafted it and they know exactly what to do and they can memorize it. But like a goblin cave
Right.
where there's dozens of goblins coming and going and they switch out and change out and it's maybe they did put a bunch of deadly sleigh traps everywhere because they're goblins. They just whatever it is.
Sure.
But I could also see it going the other way of saying, well, no, like we're just going to be killing ourselves left and
Right.
right on a daily basis as people fuck this up and forget about the very specific path. So
That
let's avoid those. We'll do like a couple maybe in like areas where we could try and bait someone into it.
sure.
But other than that, where it's like it's alarms, it's restraining traps.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Now that said, if it was like a goblin cave or whatever, kobolds, things like that, I do feel like it'd be pretty reasonable to be like, okay, there's three different directions here, and this one is definitely trapped. Like nobody go down that way. There's literally nothing other than a little kill chamber that we've set up for people who don't know the area. Um,
Right.
if it's like just along the normal walking paths,
That's
and
yes.
that's then
Yes.
it then I yeah the belief just falls apart for me. So you're not
Yeah.
telling me that just every morning they have to like, oh yeah, you got to crawl up on the side of the wall, or remember that the tripwire is right here and it blends in really well. It's like you're
Exactly.
not putting tripwires in front of yourself. Like that's my home defense system, is I have a tripwire on my back door, and if I forget about it that day or I just take a wrong step, then whoops.
Whoops. Crossbow bolt to the chest.
Yeah.
Should have remembered.
Or dodged the crossbow bolt. I mean,
Right.
you had a bit of a head start on it. Um,
Yeah.
one thing that I just feel kind of weird about when it comes to traps is the fact that, you know, like if you're in a dungeon, there's always that conversation of people are going to be just expecting traps, right? So you either get the party who is saying like, I walk 5 feet forward and I check for traps, or I carry the 10-foot pole, tapping everything, trying to do whatever. And that's explained to, hey, get around that, assume people are looking for traps, and use that passive perception.
Hmm.
And I take some issue in, I guess, two ways when it comes to that. One, the fact that perception becomes overused and a bit relied on when it is not a required skill for everybody to have, even though many times D&D makes it feel necessary for everyone to have it. But also the fact that it doesn't allow you to. It's too constraining. I want there to be other ways to kind of detect traps, and that's something that I really try to put in, though I don't use traps every single day. But the idea that there's multiple ways to maybe spot the trap, be it a, you know, arcana check because there were some runes on the floor, and you notice that, oh, these ones are actually dangerous or different than the ones we've seen in the last, I don't know, 30 feet of the dungeon or something. Or, you know, like a pit trap, noticing with a nature check, or even passive nature check if you want to still keep that idea of using a passive,
Hmm.
where, oh, these leaves look a little bit more dead than they should, or they're from a different area of the woods than would be right in this pathway. I think that even in Xanathars, there's an over reliance on perception, and that I just don't feel like really makes for a as fun of a table as trying to utilize everybody's abilities.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, in regards to also another way to handle if the party's always like the 10-foot pole and every 5 feet check in for traps, that sort of thing. Even if you try and say passive, "Oh, we're going to use passive," and they push back, it's like no, like we're being careful. I mean, like truly take a step and look, and take a step and look. Start rolling extra random encounters, or actually roll random encounters. We don't really do those anymore because they're kind of annoying and tedious. And it's like you could kind of start using them as punishment if someone's basically abusing the system,
It's
where
true.
like if an actual person was like in that area doing that and it's going to take them hours to go down a hallway, it's like, but we're in D&D, kind of skip it, so the person's like, oh yeah, we'll just take the hours, who cares. Start, you know, beefing up the other encounters that you have planned because they know you're coming because you took so damn long in that hallway, so they get reinforcements. It's a harder fight. Start throwing random encounters at them as they get caught by guards,
I'm of
things
the
like
total
that.
opposite mind. I'm like, just remove traps. If you have a player who wants to stop every 5 seconds and check for traps, there's never going to be another trap in my game. It's gone. I'm taking them out because you ruined it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, so actually I guess the really good advice, the adult advice, is just talk with the players. Like,
right.
hey, you're not really playing a believable, realistic way. You're making this hard to do this. Just kind of deal with me on this one.
I love
Yeah.
how we're
You know,
I
like
meet
mean,
me
saying that.
halfway.
It's like, oh, how dumb, how unbelievable, how unrealistic. As if you just like walk down a hallway full of punji pits and be like, no, I'll just take it. I'll take the deck save. I don't have the 5 minutes to tap around with the
no, no, no,
stake.
no. No, it's not that. It's more of that you need to trust that your DM is going to give you an opportunity to spot it, and that you sitting there trying to check for it is just slowing things down. Because even if I don't use the passive perception, which I know I've done it in the past, I've tried it in the past, I've got more thoughts on passive perception that I'll bring up in a minute, but I would rather people roll for it and just if I say you failed, then just get over it. I know you're looking for traps. I know that you're keeping it in mind. So when I say roll a perception check and everyone rolls a 5, you didn't see it. You were checking. So that to me is all that it needs to be, is just let the roll happen, and ask for the roll still. Passive it the reason why I dislike passive perception is because it's not really easy to create from a homebrew perspective when you know what everybody's perception already is. And it makes it really frustrating when I'm trying to design a dungeon and it's no longer deciding the points where a challenge comes up. It's basically saying if you pass or fail when I set the DC. Because
Yeah.
I can see that somebody has a 22 perception, passive perception. So it's no question if they're walking through the dungeon and we're using passive, then unless I set the DC higher than 22, they're seeing every single trap. And that's okay to some extent. Yes, there's that idea of reward the player for investing in this ability and being good at it. Yeah, that works to some extent, but they can also feel rewarded from rolling for it and having a plus 10 to their perception. And that's still going to feel more rewarding than me just saying, oh, yeah, I didn't want to set the DC too high. That would be unrealistic.
Right. Yeah, and I just kind of ran into that in the game I'm DMing for this group, and it was this hideout, and it's full of all these secret doors, where it's like interconnects to these rooms, and if they don't find any, it's this really big slog through it all.
Mm,
And the idea is if they find every secret door, it's like it's nothing. So
right.
it's kind of like find a couple and like stitch together this unique path through it, which was really cool. But they all had a flat DC of 15, and it specifically said use their passive perception. And two of the players had a passive perception of 15, and it's like they're just gonna find them all.
Right.
So I just made them roll anyways,
Yep.
and then it worked out exactly as intended.
Yeah, it just works so much better. I mean, honestly, I think the main time that I am a fan of passive perception these days is if you're sleeping, things like that. But otherwise, to me, it's the fact that you are skilled in that ability is to know to even roll in the first place. Like that's kind of what's triggering it. So I don't know.
Right.
I was going to say that for pre-written adventures, passive works a little bit better, but if everything is a DC 15 in the entire dungeon, yeah,
Yep.
you've basically decided at the start they're either failing every single one of these or they're succeeding on every single one of them.
Yep.
Now, there's probably an in between where if your party is below the passive perception line, then they can roll for it. But that to me still just doesn't feel good because you're still looking at it as they're either auto succeeding or auto failing, or we're rolling every time anyways. So why didn't we just say we were going to roll every time?
Right.
So that's kind of my thoughts around the perception question because I think
Yeah.
it comes up a lot with traps. It just if using the passive, it saps the fun for me entirely.
Yep. I agree 100%. But then the other way to handle it, and as a segue to complex straps, is just
Yes.
use those, and like even if they notice them, it doesn't really matter. Complex straps usually more block the path until they're solved. So even if the person's noticing them, it don't, really doesn't matter. It's like it's kind of one of those things you realize are we most likely have to go in there and trigger this trap and deal with it before it kills us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really love the concept of complex traps. I think they are very difficult to get right. And even in Xanathars, I find it absolutely hilarious. The first trap they have as an example is so hilariously complicated that
I
I
ran
know
that for you guys. Yeah,
I've run it before. I think you've run us with this
yeah,
before as well. And I don't know if every single aspect of it was used, but it's so much. It's literally a page worth of notes on how to run this complex trap. And that is not the right way to go about this.
I don't know. It was kind of fun. The only problem is you were all pretty weakened, and so I had to tone it down. Otherwise, you're always just gonna die.
Yeah, this one it's supposed to be this Path of Blades. If you're not familiar with it, we're not going to read through all of it, but just read it. But it's supposed to be a level 1 through 4 trap. It specifically says dangerous, but levels 1 through 4, it's talking about dealing potentially
2d10.
2d10 damage, not even per round, like twice a round. So you're literally going to kill your party in like one round and then I don't know what. That's it. You murdered your party.
Yeah. All right. Let's back up though. Let's not dive into the specifics of that. We
That's
should
fine.
talk
That's
into
fine.
yeah. In general, yeah. We should talk in general how complex traps work. And like we kind of mentioned at the beginning, they feel a lot more like combat. Just instead of an enemy, it's like a creature you're fighting. It's a trap that you're dealing with. That usually has its initiative count. It's generally fixed. And it's certain things happen on an initiative count, and there's these certain things you need to do to disarm the trap or get through it, depending on what it is. And you totally could also throw enemies in with this. Like there's one of the I almost did this to you guys, and when I ran out of the abyss and kind of homebrewed, like the end dungeon, the Tempest, Poison Tempest one, where this room slowly fills up with poison, and you have to like figure out a way to stop it or open the door, which is magically locked, before you die from the poison. And you could definitely add in like a construct in there to fight you because
Right.
they're immune to poison. things like that. So it depends how dynamic you want to make it, how difficult you want to make it. I think something that could be really cool is pairing a boss fight with a complex trap.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
instead of the
it's interesting.
because we always talk about bosses by themselves, like an enemy by themselves dies really easily, and so give them minions. But if you get like a little tired of that, or you have someone who doesn't make sense to have minions, put them in the middle room of a complex trap that they, for some reason or whatever reason, are immune to. So you have this complex trap you need to be deal with and wasting actions on and doing damage to you while also trying to kill this boss.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it's a very, and I don't mean this negatively, it's like a video gamey approach that's very
Sure.
common in a
Yeah.
video game, that there's, whatever the big bad is, and then there's, I don't know, I'm just imagining what the saws, like massive saws on the ground popping out. I don't know why that's coming to mind. I can't think of a single boss fight that's actually involved, but whatever. That's what's coming to mind. That definitely works. I mean, it's not minions. It does give the group another way to interact. One of the issues that I see with that is it can be, I mean, it's a little bit harder to balance, right? And it can
Yeah.
spiral out of control rather quickly. The poisoned room, for example, saying that you're fighting a construct and you're trying to uh, stop poison gas from flooding the room. Well, if you're taking damage from a construct whapping you with their 3d12 greatsword or whatever amount of damage they do, plus you fail your constitution saving throw, it can just spiral rather quickly in terms of
Sure.
damage, especially if the party is having a hard time with it. I mean, puzzles a lot of times in D&D, which complex traps start to fall into that idea of being
Hmm.
a puzzle. Usually you have time to think about things in between your turns. You have times to try something, maybe nothing happens, maybe you're met with a negative action because of something you do. Traps differ in that you don't have to interact with it in order for something bad to happen. In fact, not interacting is usually the number one way to have a bad time with it. So that idea of needing to kill an enemy while also figuring out the puzzle that's going on and stopping it, it just, I feel like you have to be really careful. And a lot of the ones listed in here, the damages that go with it, I don't think
Hmm.
I'd recommend doing something like that.
Yeah, 100%. So complex traps have multiple different elements, just like simple traps, a level and a threat and a trigger. Pretty standard stuff. But then they have an initiative counter, which we already mentioned. It's usually fixed, like usually 10 or 20, or sometimes both, depending on what the trap is, where certain things happen. Then they have active elements where it's on the turn, it produces this effect. Blades shoot out of the hallway wall, more gas fills the chamber. It's kind of a fixed thing. Then the dynamic elements, which could change based on what the characters do or how far they've progressed in the trap and things like that. And then constant elements, where it's just like a threat even when it's not on its turn, just kind of this like lingering thing. Where if it's like the floor drops out and you're in a pool of acid and you're just always taking damage, in addition to needing to do all this other crap. And then, of course, they have countermeasures, same as simple traps, though these are usually a lot more than just a single roll, obviously, to disarm. A lot of times you'll see them, and I think it's probably best to do it this way, where there is a planned way to disarm it, and you would have to get in the head of whoever put this trap there, what they would realistically need to do without like hurting themselves.
Every morning I just wade through
Yeah,
the acid pool. What are you talking about?
right. or yeah, or if it is like a kill room type thing, maybe there is not a planned way. There's not like a certain way you could turn the knobs on the wall to shut off the poison or anything like that. It's you need to find a way to break it. The door slams shut and it gets locked and then barred and then a magical ward in front of it. And so they could dispel the magical ward and then pick the lock and then bash the door down. It's like three separate things and make them high DCs. Or there's some way to like get into the mechanisms in the wall and shut it down. You need to get creative with it. And then also definitely absolutely another time to let the players get creative with it.
Yeah, that's more important, I think. I mean, set up the challenge as you will. It's more letting them do whatever they want with it. Honestly, I think thinking of a countermeasure, while mildly important as a DM, it's definitely not the key thing. I mean, the countermeasures, people will think of ways to do it. And that's I guess, can go a couple different ways as well, depending on how much of a puzzle you want this to feel like and how much of a trap slash resource drain it's supposed to feel. One way to approach it as well is to make the things they need to do very obvious. They're in a room with 3 runes that are lighting up, and every single round it lights up, and this effect happens, then this effect happens. Well, the party knows those runes probably need to be dealt with, or the
Right.
crystals, or whatever. The swinging blade that has a flashing blue icon on it that says attack me. That can be okay too. It doesn't need to be a puzzle every single time. The complexity does not have to come in figuring out the solution. The complexity is more in that it is in this initiative order, or you're allowing for different ways for it to be solved, but the end result can be the same a lot of times.
I think this is a critical problem that almost everybody will run into in D&D and in real life, and it's the idea that you can describe things well. No one can describe anything well at all. Nobody can do that because everybody has an image in their head when words enter their ears, and everybody's is different. So you
Not
need
my
to
wife.
just get.
She actually has a really hard time imagining things, but that's besides the point.
So she needs this even more. You need
Yeah.
to basically. There is a point where you need to just spoon feed the party. Hey, you can smash this thing. It's like,
Yes.
oh, you didn't ask me if you could smash that thing. Don't, because it's frustrating. And especially when you're starting to roll and you're like, oh, 2 more D10 damage because you didn't ask the right question.
Yeah.
No, feed them. Spoon feed your players. It will be more fun with complex traps because there is just challenge after challenge to get through it. It's not a one and done fix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll agree with that. Yeah, especially I'd say the more complex you make it, like that Path of Blades one, where it has like 3 different phases between swinging blades, crushing pillars, and then a rune at the end that you are frightened of and have to run back into the crushing pillars.
It's so mean.
It's too much. It is like it doesn't matter. That's one where like that's super complicated. There's so much going on, and I'm right there with you, Will. I think you need to really spoon feed them and say, as you're passing by the whirring blades, well, there's this joint that looks weaker than the rest, and you could probably fire at it and maybe break those. Or there's a lever over here, or there's 3 levers, and one of them is going to correctly do it. And they know the answer because they're walking through here every day, but you now have to figure it out. Little things like that to actually push people in a direction can be good. It's that continuing to have an open mind as they go through it. If they want to ignore that and try something else, as long as it's within reason, I wouldn't punish people for that.
Sure. So to just kind of give an example, I think I could kind of quickly run through the complex trap, or
Sure.
the Path of Blades one, of how that works. So its trigger is when a non-undead creature enters the hallway, and it's a 20-foot wide, 160-foot hallway. There's a lot here, so I'm going to just go through it
Yeah,
fast.
that's
It's just
fine.
kind of and the trap does things on initiative count 20 and 10. It has 3 different active elements: whirling blades, crushing pillars, and runes of fear. The whirling blades act on initiative count 20 in the first 80 feet of the hallway. Anybody who's standing there on initiative count 20 will get attacked by the blades. It's +5 to hit, and it does 2d10 slashing damage. Just happens. Then on initiative count 10, the next 50 feet after the blades, these pillars crush down, and it's a DC 15 dex save, and a creature takes 2d10 bludgeoning damage, is knocked prone. On a success, they take half. And then the Rune of Fear is anybody in the last 30 feet of the hallway after the pillars. On initiative count 10, this Rune of Fear triggers, and everyone has to make a DC 15 wisdom saving throw who's standing in that area, or they'll be frightened and they have to run away from the end of the hallway. And as far as their speed allows, ignoring all danger into the pillars, into the whirling blades, and basically restart it.
Yep. And they then have to make the DC 15 wisdom saving throw before they can even move forward, and then they have to make it again.
Yep, they're not immune or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's nuts. And it's also, as written, there's no like one person makes it and they pull a lever and it stops. It goes. Everyone has to get through it. And it gets worse. There's dynamic elements after the blades and the pillars speed up. And after like a certain number of rounds or something like that, they start doing more damage. And if someone tries to like tamper with the rune of fear to like make it not happen, to like disable it or something like that, every successful check on an attempt to disable the rune increases the blades and the crushing pillars damage by another d10, and the rune saving throw by DC 1. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It,
And then
Level
there
one
are
through four,
countermeasures.
people.
Yeah.
Level
Yeah.
1 through 4.
There
Dangerous
are
threat.
yeah. There are countermeasures. Like the whirling blades. Oh, where is it? Yeah, the
the,
characters can smash the blades, damage them, stuff like that. Jam up the works in the wall. The pillars, they're not susceptible to any countermeasures.
just don't get crushed, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, the rune of fear can be used 3 castings of the spell magic.
Or 3 successful Arcana checks.
Right.
So,
But every single one that you do on that increases the damage.
Yeah.
So obviously we're kind of getting a little down on this about how incredibly powerful and deadly this is, but it is like a cool idea of a trap just for higher
Yeah.
level characters when they have more toys to take care of this. I ran you guys through this at like level 8 or 9 or something like that, and I did not beef it up in any way,
Yeah.
and it was still pretty deadly.
And if you remember, you actually allowed us to not be in the trap at all, which is something to keep in mind with complex traps too. It was basically like, here's the entrance to it, and then 5 feet forward is where all of the badness starts. And we realized pretty early on, I think Will, you in particular, you were like, your character was like, I can't do this. I can't do this, so you all need to disable it, and I'm not gonna just step out into this and die just because we all need to do our part. Which is something to keep in mind as well with complex traps. You want to make sure that everybody has to be involved, and that making sure everybody involved doesn't immediately lead to a TPK. I mean, this one's just too tough.
And that's
I
where
also got rid of the root of fear.
I thought so.
Yeah,
I feel like I remembered
yeah.
something was being changed.
That's where, like, I think the wind of whirling blades is the best aspect of this trap. It's a trap that you can basically fight down if you need to. Everybody
Yes.
can contribute in a significant way to making these blades no longer a threat. So it's got +5 to hit. Every time you bash it or disable it or figure it out, it gets -2 to that +5. You can eventually get it to the blades are no longer a threat to anybody in the party. So it's not, and then of course, then you walk into the smashy pillars and it's, somebody in the party is getting just bopped every single round, and they're going to have a bad time.
Especially because of the whole, it's a compounding effect. You get knocked prone, and you're on the ground, your speed is halved, so you're going to spend half your movement standing up and hope you have gotten far enough in that you can run out.
Oh, you dump decks? You get pillared every round.
Yeah.
Until we fix the trap. And I love that they had the gall to say crushing pillars. The pillars are not susceptible to countermeasures. When they're just like right before it, it's like, look at all these brilliant ways to deal with this trap that don't suck. The crushing pillars have no countermeasures.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote this was in a bad mood.
So I guess that's more of an example of what not to do.
It really is. It's too much. It's too complicated for the GM. If I'm being completely honest, it's a lot of moving parts and kind of confusing to make sure you're keeping track of everything. I mean, there's this whole thing with if the blades miss, then they move faster, but if they hit, their attack bonus drops. And like so many little itty bitty details that you're going to have a spreadsheet tracking what round it is, what's happened in the last round, and what's supposed to be the damage for everything at this point. So take 1, maybe 2 of these ideas and use that as the complex trap, which I know, Ellie, you're saying that's what you did, getting rid of the rune of fear. I mean, to me, some of these other ones, the other example complex traps they have do tone down the complexity a pretty good amount. But to me, the idea of a complex trap is, again, like you get people into an area, they have to interact with it. And honestly, something I'll throw out is maybe the just like a simple trap where after it triggers, it's usually over. It's okay to not have the trap go on indefinitely. Sometimes things run out of power or energy or whatever you want to say. Maybe you have it set up so that this complex trap is going to last for 4 rounds and either the party successfully disables it or they get their butts kicked for 4 rounds straight. And that to me makes it a little bit more forgiving, and you can balance it a little bit easier as well, because if the party can't figure things out, or if it's one of those nights where the rolls are just absolute garbage and they need 3 successful arcana checks and only one person is proficient in arcana, maybe it's okay to just have it end and say the goal was accomplished, resources have been taken, you are beaten up, and this wasn't supposed to be a TPK. And again, it just from a logical standpoint, like most of the things that power these traps just like wouldn't be able to go on indefinitely in my mind.
That makes a lot of sense. Just from a world building, it does make it more interesting mechanically.
Yeah.
And then there's always that talk of the party needs to figure out, all right, can this run indefinitely? Can
Yeah.
we wait it out, or is it not going to? And if we try and just wait it out, we're just gonna die.
Yeah, but then even if so, yeah, that is super interesting, and it makes me think of like how let's say a monk might interact differently with the whirling blades versus a barbarian. The barbarian's like, well, I'm not going to sit here and just take this for 5 rounds straight. I'm going to start smashing them. Whereas the monk's
Right.
like, I'm just going to patient defense. I'm going to dodge every single round here and see which of these I can get around, and try and weave through them versus trying to just smash it.
Right.
So that kind of idea is where otherwise you'd be kind of mad at the monk, right? Like, hey, you're not doing your part. Like, do the thing. Help me out here.
Right.
Maybe the barbarian gets mad about it anyways, but you can't stop that.
Yeah. I actually probably help the barbarian to get mad. they get resistance to it all.
Yeah. One idea I had for a start of an idea I had for a complex trap was just the idea of like walking through a dungeon hallway or whatever, and in that idea of having people notice something is off beforehand, you'd like have, again, maybe runes somewhere around the room or just some magical identifying thing, and either the wizard or whoever rolling an arcana check successfully notices it, or they don't. If they notice it, probably get a little bit more prepared for it. But as they're walking through the hallway, basically you run into a wall, but realize visually the hallway continues. So just kind of have this like stopping. It's more or less like the Roadrunner style thing, right? Like painting a black hole on the side of a mountain. So the party runs into it, and that's when the trap kind of starts and triggers. And if they try and go back, same deal. It's going to be blocked off the other direction. So just a good way to kind of get them into the trap in the first place. Beyond the, I guess it'd really be the same thing as like doors slamming down in front of them, but a little more magic related.
Sure.
But then from there, I had nothing. So I was just like, it's like that sounds like a good start. Where do we go from there? The floor is lava.
So basically, your start of the trap is get them stuck in a room.
I know, right? Hey,
in a
it's
flavorful
still
way. Okay.
Yep. Hey, look, I can't come
job.
up with. Usually, I come with all the details, and y'all just listen to me talk for 5 minutes. So I wanted to see if you could add some. You're welcome. It's a collaborative
Well,
game.
There's a million ways to go with that. There's the classic, the walls or the ceiling starts crushing in and figuring out the mechanics. So stop it.
Let's even stop right there, because that actually to me is a good like classic one that the obvious end point to it is it crushes, everyone dies. So that to me is like it's a challenge as a GM to think of how do you make this a interesting thing that doesn't end in just squishing the entire party.
Yeah, you just need to let people get creative. Also have maybe the idea of a mechanism somewhere that they can mess with. But I don't know. I know I'm the one who said it, but because I felt pressure to just come up with something. Not really that exciting. All right,
I hate that trap so friggin' much.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, get creative. It's a freaking industrial compactor. You're dead. It's over. DC 50 strength check. You're dead. It's over.
Right.
Well, that's I guess you could have if you didn't make it a DC 50 strength check, the barbarian slowing things down or whoever, just somebody trying to hold it up as a strength check. So while the smarter characters try and figure out whatever that mechanism is, the runes on the wall, and figure out what they mean, how to disable them, then you have the stronger players trying to hold up the room, and every time they fail, it's moving a little bit further down.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be cool. Cool way to handle it.
And that's one
Um,
where, again, I would probably set a time limit on it, right? Like, this is going to go for 4 or 5 rounds, and if you fail, then it crushes you just a little bit. You're all going to take some damage, but we're not going to just pulverize you. And if you want to say that's because, everybody did a great job of holding it up or disabled one of the runes out of the three, that's fine to me.
sure. All right. So another way to take the initial premise that you came up
You
with
can
and
you
kind
can
of
make
play.
another initial
No,
premise,
no,
but
no, no. I like it. I got somewhere with it. So it's like the walls are changing. Like all of a sudden you're trapped in there. So this kind of magical shifting element to it.
there we go.
This wouldn't be a complex trap in the sense of like Xanathars of the initiative and dynamic actions and constant actions. Just an interesting trap is you've been shunted to a demiplane that is now this room,
Oh gosh.
and that is it. And it's like if you do nothing, you are all going to die there. Maybe say there's limited air, or just they have days and they're going to die of dehydration once they run out of water or whatever, or some big terrible thing is going to come and get them eventually and to mess them up. And then it becomes this game of how do you get out of this?
Yeah.
You're stuck in this closed room in a demiplane somewhere. Um, so I think I have to burn like a really high like plane shift spell slot. When if they're not high enough to get that, that's when you can start adding little puzzle elements to it. I'm not going to be able to come up with these off the top of my head. It would be something I need to sit down and write down and think
Yeah.
about. But certain areas, ways they can interact with the wall, like get creative with the whole like just walking into it makes it just like a painted thing and it's not real. When if their eyes are closed, can they then walk through and that gets them part way out and then that no longer works? Things like that. They have to kind of like mess with the mechanics of this demiplane reality to get out.
That's good. I'm going to use that on you guys.
Okay.
Oh, how about this? They have to spend years and years training with each other, like fighting and taking long rests until they learn the plane shift spell.
Oh my gosh. The hyperbolic time chamber.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so I mean, complex traps say I do think they can be a little bit difficult to think of, because you do need to just make up a reasonable scenario for them to be walking into it, right? And the thing that always gets me is just like the believability of somebody creating it in the first place. It has to be there. Like, I can't, maybe it's just the fantasy world I run, but there's not many people whose day jobs are dungeon designers and like are being hired out by evil people to make these dangerous chasms and whatnot. So, it's like it has to be somewhat believable why this would be here. So if like every single room of a dungeon just has these absolutely wild Rube Goldberg-esque contraptions that need to be stopped by either magical means or physical means or some combination of the both, almost as if a group of diverse people with different skill sets were going to walk into that room, like, you're gonna lose me so quickly.
Yeah, yeah. If it's constant, yeah.
And that even brings up just I'll touch on this quickly. Different ways that we've tried traps in the past, beyond complex, simple, whatever. There's an article by the Angry GM. If you've ever read anything by them, I know you two have, but to listeners, specifically around making traps more interesting and the idea of a click mechanic. Basically, once the trap is set off, gives the person a chance to react to the trap. And depending on what they do, maybe it helps them out. Say, for example, you step on a pressure plate, crossbow bolts are going to shoot out. All that you say as a GM is you step on a pressure plate and click. What do? The player either says, I drop to the ground, or they say, and I pull out my shield, something like that. And based on what they do, you either give them an advantage to it or you don't. We tried that. I ran that before. It works okay. I think it does become a little bit stale even after like one dungeon. I was kind of done with the mechanic. because it does start to feel like either it just feels like the party's taking a guess. Where it
Yeah.
was fun is I had a dungeon that was basically the same trap over and over again with potentially different effects. And that I felt like worked out okay because it felt like you all were learning the dungeon as you went on. Once you saw that, oh, this particular rune does this type of damage, or, like this, shoots down fire, this one shoots down poison, and I need to hold my breath, learning those little nuances, and then eventually learning how to disarm them to the point that I was like, all right, the traps are no longer a thing. You all have figured them out. Let me kind of set a pace for the traps that kept them, I feel like kept them interesting and allowed me to remove them entirely once they got old.
Yeah, I did like that, and that had nothing to do with the click mechanic, though. That was just the repetition of traps and us
Sure.
kind of puzzling them out.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of like the whole dungeon was a complex trap as we
That's
sort
a
of
good
figured
point.
it all out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
So yeah, that was
good
a good
point
way to
too.
handle that.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah, we
I
started
like
saying
the
the blade.
idea of the click
Go on.
mechanic a lot more than I liked the click mechanic.
Yeah,
It
yeah. I'll
seemed like
agree
a
with
better
that.
idea
Yeah,
than it was.
we stopped doing it, I think, for a reason, or forgot
Yeah.
about it more than anything.
Yeah, it really just feel like random bullshit. It's just like, you might as well roll a d6 on a 5 or 6. You get advantage on your save.
Yeah, yeah, and I
Like,
think one
because
of
yeah, you
the
had nothing to base that off of.
or you had too much to base it off of, and that was what was hard. Was
Right.
either you as the GM will have to describe so much that it's obvious what the player does and they get a benefit to it, or you describe so little that, as you said, they're taking just a wild guess.
Yeah. Yeah,
And if you ever need to take a wild guess as to what code you
there we
should
go.
use on any website, I would recommend just using MM10 across the board. But I know that it would work specifically for Metallic Dice games if you wanted to get 10% off your order of dice or dice accessories.
That's
Click.
good. Yeah.
Thank you as
Quick, I
always.
saved 10% off on my dice.
Yeah. Next time you're
You get
walking through a
advantage on your
dungeon,
roll.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's click. I use the code MM10, and then the DM's like, I have to roll 10% less damage. It works universally. You can tell them. If you have any ideas for traps, how you've run them in the past, different unique ways beyond the simple or complex or anything in between, please let us know either in the YouTube comments or via social media in those general ways. And thank you, as always, to our patrons: Ed G, Muddawait, Brian H, Craig A, Isaac M, Jeff W, Star Shinobi, Vincent M, Bob F, Joe P, Rick D, Sentinel D20, Tyler S, Gray, Barons, Adam A, Rob K, and Ray. If you want to support the show, you can do that at monstersmulticlass.com/support, and you can find our Patreon as well as all of our other affiliates. And on our Patreon, get early access to episodes most of the time, as well as campaign diaries and show notes, and that's generally it. Occasionally I'll throw maps on there. Why not? And make sure to like and subscribe. Yep, should have said that earlier. Always should, but we never do.
Yeah. All right, and as always, thanks for watching.